Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to today's Morning Blast. It is Monday, the 21st of July, all day. As usual, you join myself and Mr. Michael Brown for a review of the weekend and maybe the back end of the week and a preview of the upcoming week. And today, obviously, normally we get a bit more done as it's Monday, but before we do, I'll get the legals out of the way. Nothing discussed on the Spaces session constitute trading or investment advice when refers any kind of endorsement by PIQ, myself, Ryan Paisley, or indeed Mr. Michael Brown. Hello, Mr. Michael Brown.
Very good morning, Ryan. Good morning, everyone, from an incredibly grey and
Yeah.
soaking wet city of London this morning.
Yeah, I could make a crude analogy there, but I won't 'cause I'm more
Oh,
mature
no.
these days. I was thinking, would it make sense, like we did for Iran and stuff, would it make sense for me just to read out the little Japanese section that Zach has put together on the overnight news headlines, just because it tees up the rest of the show pretty much, well, at least a good part of it.
You certainly can. I've just had to stop myself saying something, so yes, carry on.
Oh,
I
good.
think I think you probably know what I was going to say.
Yeah. Well, moving on. Right. So just
Yeah, exactly.
before we crack on, let me read out some of the Japanese headlines because obviously that's what most of the people have been getting frothy knickers about this morning. Japan's ruling coalition lost control of the upper house in an election on Sunday. Ashiba's LDP and coalition partner Komieto, I believe that's how you spell it, but I pronounce it, but I probably butchered it, returned 47 seats. That's short of the 50 seats it needed to ensure a majority. The main opposition, the CDP, finished second with 22 seats, while the far-right Sansito Party announced its arrival in mainstream politics, adding 14 seats to one elected previously. That's their version of reform, basically. It's quite ironic, but they've got very, very tough immigration policies anyway. And people are saying that one of the things that Japan needs to do, especially because of the state their demographics are in, is to start allowing foreign nationals into work and etc. But they seem to be going to, I believe the alternative name for this party is Japan First as well. So potentially the one nation that could do with some immigration is already battened
Young
down on
blood.
it. Yeah, exactly. What else we got? Japanese PM Ashiba has vowed to remain in office, prompting some of his own party to deliberate his future as the opposition weighed a no confidence motion. Ashiba said he would remain to oversee tariff talks with the US. Global hedge funds, they offloaded Japanese equities at the sharpest pace in almost 2.5 months last week, ahead of the country's upper house election on Sunday. That's according to Goldman Sachs. And finally, before Michael Brown can kick back on to regular scheduling, Japanese markets are obviously closed today for a holiday, but the rise in Nikkei, yen and Nikkei futures showed investors already priced in the election outcome. But that's where we stand on Japan. Over to you, Michael.
Yeah, just on that last point, I would argue it's not necessarily a case of it having been priced in. I would say it's probably that the election outcome isn't the sort of worst case scenario that everyone had feared. The
It's good
LDP have,
enough.
yeah, exactly. It's good enough. Ishiba can kind of just meander on for a little bit and muddle through. We don't have to bring other parties into government. There's not a huge risk of lower house elections or massive fiscal stimulus. So
Yeah,
yeah, I
and
think some of those
also
hedges are being unwound, basically.
it's not like the tariff talks have to restart from scratch again because there's enough. Shiba's got enough
Mm.
behind him that he can carry this on with a mandate of such.
Yeah, exactly
I
that.
mean, if it was a
Exactly that.
whitewash, if it's a complete whitewash, and say they had like 10 seats, they'd be like, well, what the fuck's this guy doing talking to Trump?
Yeah, and there is the potential that, I'm no expert on Japan whatsoever, but, there is a case that goes, Ishiba gets a trade deal done and then says, right, I'm off now. But, it's very much a case of there is some stability for the time being,
Yes.
which I think is
Yeah.
why we're
Yeah.
seeing that move. And actually the other interesting one is over the last kind of hour or so since cash trade resumed, we've actually seen quite a decent rally at the long end of the Treasury curve as well, which I wonder if that's just a sort of spillover from that. Obviously, as you say, JGBs are closed until tomorrow.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on from that because there are a few other headlines from Friday and from over the weekend worth recapping. We may as well start with the issue of trade. We'll start with US EU trade negotiations. The FT reporting right at the end of Friday that President Trump is reportedly pushing for a minimum tariff of between 15 and 20% on all EU goods. This comes from three sources familiar with the matter. Apparently, Trump has been unmoved by the recent EU offer on auto tariffs and will be happy to keep the 25% sectoral levy as planned. Having said that, the report itself noted that the President Trump's hardened stance, quote, aims to test the EU's pain threshold. In other words, this is basically just a negotiating gambit from President Trump, as we've seen many, many times in the past. There were also some reports, I think also in the FT this morning, that the EU are meeting around contingencies and what they would do in the event that there wasn't a US-EU trade deal. A few people have got all excited about that. I mean, frankly, with 2 weeks to go less than 2 weeks to go until the negotiating deadline, you'd be a bit concerned if they weren't meeting to discuss what they would do if those negotiations failed. So I don't think it's a case of, the EU saying we're not going to get a deal. It's more a case of saying we need to be prepared for all eventualities, which is absolutely the correct thing to be doing. Also on trade, in terms of US-China trade relations and just relations more broadly, the South China Morning Post reporting yesterday that President Trump and President Xi may meet ahead of or during the APEC summit. This is citing multiple sources familiar with the matter. For reference, the APEC summit is scheduled for the 31st of October and the 1st of November in South Korea. I would expect, given how intricately planned these sort of events are, they would want to get on with planning such a visit or such a meeting sooner rather than later if it were to take place. So certainly something to keep an eye on there. Also, just sticking with China, Reuters reporting on Friday that the Chinese have issued their first 2025 rare earth export quotas. Apparently they did this without issuing a public statement. Well, it's in the public domain now, but they have not provided the volumes around those permits that were issued. Of course, that is becoming very, very much a sort of trade-related hot potato at this moment in time.
Just a bit of colour on that. So the reports we had out for this were that the amount that the US received in June from China on rare earth magnets was more than 7 times the level they had in May. So obviously this is a significant increase in what's being shipped over, and obviously this is being used for electric vehicles and wind turbines, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it basically seems that the sort of quid pro quo is rare earths going one way and NVIDIA chips going the other.
Yes, that definitely seems
very,
to be
very crude terms. No matter how much the administration are denying that one, it very much seems like that is actually what's going on. And lastly, on the trade front, we heard from the oleaginous, obsequious Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick yesterday. He was doing the rounds on television. He said that August the 1st is a hard deadline for tariffs. Yeah, of course it is, pal. He also said that he is confident a deal will be done with Europe and that small countries will pay a baseline 10% tariff. So bad news for those penguins. It looks like they're going to be stuck with that one.
So on this, what quantifies a small country? Are we talking land mass? Are we talking population? Are we talking amount of trade they do? I need clarity, man. The A-level geography inside me is screaming out. It's not just all Oxbow lakes and sloppy blowjobs.
You're giving them you're giving them way too much credit if you think they've actually tried to define what a small country is. I think basically the US the Trump administration definition of a small country is one that we haven't bothered to send a letter to yet.
Right, okay.
I think that's basically the point we've got to on that one. Anyway, away from trade, in terms of other bits and bobs from Friday and over the weekend, we did have some data out of the States on Friday. Housing starts and building permits both beating expectations at 1.321 million and 1.397 million respectively. Consumer sentiment from the University of Michigan also topping consensus estimates at 61.8, up for a prior 60.7. Of course, 3 data releases there that all absolutely scream that the US needs to set the Fed funds rate at 1%. No, they don't, despite what President Trump is saying. And of course, he has continued to rant away about that over the weekend. Speaking of President Trump, he has had a relatively quiet weekend, actually, playing golf at his golf course near Washington, D.C. But he did make some remarks on Friday. He was saying that there are big trade deals to be announced soon. There's been big trade deals to be announced soon for the last 3 months, and we haven't really seen any. So don't hold your breath on that one. He was also saying that he is not going to let the dollar slide. Now, importantly, this was not said in the context of the dollar's valuation. It was more in the context of the dollar as a global or the global reserve currency. So don't read beyond the headline in that one. And he was speaking at the signing of the Genius Act, which is stablecoin related and part of the crypto week that was in the United States last week. Although Trump said at the press conference, I think they named it after me, because of course they would have done. I'm actually quite pleased he said that, because I had a little wager with the boys at News Corp that he would, and perhaps what was the most obvious line he's ever used. Away from all of that nonsense, a few other things just to mention this morning. Reuters sources on the BOJ noting that Bank of Japan may offer a less gloomy view on the near-term tariff impact. This is in terms of the BOJ's upcoming quarterly forecast round. Those forecasts are due at the end of the month, I think next Tuesday, if I remember rightly. Here in the UK, the government is said to be preparing new fines and or regulations for both Apple and Google, and that an announcement on these fines could come this week before Prime Minister Starmer and President Trump meet in Scotland. Donald Trump's trip to Scotland, another golfing trip, funnily enough, is due to take place between the 25th and the 29th of July. That is this Friday to next Tuesday, so potentially something to keep on the radar for the tech names there. Sticking with tech, JP Morgan, they are expanding their research coverage to private firms, starting with OpenAI. This basically means that what they do with public companies in terms of research, they're going to do that with private companies as well, although they have clarified they will not be offering price targets on those companies, which is kind of obvious given that they're privately held. And last but by no means least, in corporate listings news, crypto exchange operator Bullish has filed publicly for a US IPO. Now, if that isn't the perfect sign of a market top, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I was struggling to disagree with you there. Mr. Michael Brown, thank you for that. Let me just rattle through
We
some
should
of
start
those.
a competitor called Bearish.
Yeah, I don't think that's the right. I'll be honest, that's not the right mentality I want. Can't we come in with super bullish?
Yeah, uber bullish.
Uber, but there we go, done.
Probably both
Bookmark that.
trademarks, but never mind.
Trademark that sucker. Right, thank you for that, Michael. Just some quick overnight news headlines from the overnight news roundup that we put up on Substack, courtesy of Zach, etc., etc. Do subscribe, etc., etc. In trade news, obviously, I've already rattled through the Japanese headlines. Go on.
Sorry, I note that Zach has decided he can't be bothered to attend this call again.
Yes.
After all the attention we gave him on Friday.
Standards are slipping.
Disgraceful.
On the trade news, US officials told EU trade chief last week they expect Trump to demand further concessions from the bloc to get an agreement, including baseline tariff on European goods that could be in the range of 15% or higher. That's gone to Wall Street Journal. EU member states are pressing the bloc's executive body to prepare new and potent measures to hit back against US companies. This is obviously, as Michael said, this is tech companies are going to be prime targets for the EU to do that, because let's face it, they already have been prime targets by the EU regulators, should I say.
Whoever they are.
Easy for me to say, yeah. German officials, as Michael said just now, they pressed for a quick deal, and this has been an ongoing thing from MERS, saying, look, let's just focus on a few industries and we can go from there. No longer see an agreement with the US as the most likely outcome. US Treasury, Commerce Secretary Ludnick said on Sunday they expect optimism about reaching agreement with the EU, and said, I'm confident we'll get a deal done and it'll be great for America because the president has the back of America. Nvidia, it's told its Chinese customers it has limited supplies of H20 chips, the most powerful AI chip it had been allowed to sell to China under the new US export restrictions. That's the information.
I don't understand this headline, and appreciate I'm not an expert here, but I was under the understanding that Nvidia had loads of these chips in a warehouse somewhere and basically went, well, we can't send them anywhere. So either they've sold them to someone else or they've just chucked them in the sea, because otherwise, has their inventory just disappeared? Like, what's going on with that?
Or there's just such a huge demand in China for them that they're still having to tell the people in China, look, each one of you is getting a limited supply.
Well, potentially, yeah.
China's a pretty big place from what I can remember.
Yeah, that's one of those small countries Lutnick was on about earlier.
Oh yeah, full of penguins. China's exports of rare earths, we've covered that. Obviously, it's starting to flow freely. And as Michael said, the likelihood is it's kind of tied to the US starting to allow NVIDIA chips going the other way. In macro news, Treasury Secretary Besant, he's said in recent days, privately laid out the case to Trump for why he believes Trump shouldn't try to oust Fed Chair Powell. That's gone to Wall Street Journal sources, noting possible effects on the economy and markets. Obviously, we saw what the market reaction was when we heard that rumor that Trump was walking around the office waving a bit of paper saying, "This is how I'm going to get him to resign or get him
Oh,
fired."
just on that, actually,
Yeah.
I don't know whether you're going to come onto this, but I'm going to front run it anyway. Trump has actually said that story is, quote, a typically untruthful story.
Oh, yeah. He
And
came.
he has gone, if it wasn't for me, the market would be at record. If it weren't for me, the market wouldn't be at record highs right now. It probably would have crashed. Well, it did because of him in April. He then went on and said, people don't explain to me.
Yeah.
I explain to them. Of course you
Yeah.
do.
No, exactly that. I think what's obviously happened, it was a bit of look, there was like, I think it was 3 or 4 sources from this room said that he definitely did it. The market reacted. He's then gone, shit, obviously the market's not going to react as I was hoping for. I'm going to pretend it didn't happen, even though 5 people have gone to the press and said it did. But anyway,
And of
I think that's
course,
just,
remember with that Trump and the Wall Street Journal are having a bit of a barney at the moment anyway, so.
yes, exactly that. Trump wrote that he didn't need Besant to explain to him why firing Powell wouldn't be bad for the market. That's what Michael was just talking to there. Again, it's all a bit of a shit show right now. China kept moving over to China. China kept benchmark lending rates unchanged on Monday's forecast after it reported slightly better than expected second quarter economic data. Helps when you write it yourself. China's wage growth, that slowed to the weakest pace outside of the pandemic. An alternative indicator compiled by Goldman Sachs showed, revealing an obstacle to stronger consumption at home as risks abroad mount. Sticking with China, China's Premier Li launched a construction of a 1.2 trillion yuan mega dam in Tibet, which is 3 times the size of the Three Gorges Dam. I heard that it's got enough power for like 52 million homes or something stupid like that, but that seems a bit big, but I don't. What do I know? Tell you what, though, one to keep an eye on. It's not in the overnight news roundup, but one to keep an eye on because obviously the Dalai Lama is this bless him. He's getting on a bit, and there's already kind of fractures emerging between who's going to choose the next Dalai Lama, with China trying to step in and say that they get to choose it. This is just more geopolitical flaring that, won't help matters, especially with the US definitely being on the case of free Tibet and all of that stuff. So one to keep an eye on. It's one of those that won't matter at all to markets until potentially it might do one day.
Well, I'm thinking actually, with the way my hairline's going, I might be able to throw my hat in the ring for that.
Well, exactly that. What hat would you throw? I'm thinking of fedora.
Oh, God. Let's move on before this
Moving
gets
on.
slightly
Moving on.
cultural appropriated.
Yeah. Do you know what? As soon as I said that, I was like, "Oh, that was a thank God I said fedora." Right. Iron ore and steel climbed to a 4-month high as China's plan for mega dam in Tibet bolstered the outlook for the metals. New Zealand's annual consumer inflation accelerated in the second quarter, but was below economists' forecasts, leading markets to narrow the odds of a rate cut next month, given weakness in the broader economy. I'm moving to the UK now. UK consumer sentiment had a market fall for the first time. A marked fall, for the first time in nearly 3 years last month, reflecting increased worries about job security. That's gone to a Deloitte survey. So on this, me and Michael were saying last week that we found it completely bizarre that the surveys we were seeing from the UK were pointing to optimism, and that's clearly not the case. Now, this Deloitte survey, from what I read last night when it came out, yes, I'm that boring. This is one of the first surveys that actually does kind of focus in on wages, taxation, consumer demand, etc. So kind of what you would hope a proper consumer survey does, which is what the other ones didn't. And then, to the shock of no one, this one's saying actually things are looking shit and people are getting very nervous. So finally, we're seeing kind of some real, data to back up the theory that everyone's starting to get very clammy about where the UK is heading. Asking prices for newly advertised British homes and apartments recorded their biggest July fall in more than 20 years. That's according to property site Rightmove on Monday. Another bit of a negative story there. The BOE is facing pressure to hold onto more than a quarter of its bond holdings, potentially for decades, after recent market turmoil highlighted fragility of demand for long-dated government debt. Moving over to Germany, Germany's Chancellor Merz and more than 60 other nations' leading companies launched a new investment drive worth at least 100 billion euros to help lift Europe's biggest economy out of its funk. I said funk. Geopolitical news. China has stopped an American citizen who works for the Commerce Department from leaving the nation for several months. That's according to media reports. Once you get in, you can't ever leave. Britain
They've
and Germany,
also the
Wells Fargo employee,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, if you ever get sent to China on a junket, think twice.
Just don't go.
Yeah. Britain and Germany, they're set to pledge new air defence systems for Ukraine as the UK government pushes for a 50-day drive to arm Kiev and bring Russia's President Putin to the negotiating table. We did see over the weekend some kind of murmurs backwards and forwards that potentially there could be a meeting taking place in the not too distant future, but we'll see what happens there. Iran, they've reached an agreement in principle to hold talks with the UK, France and Germany over its nuclear program. According to Trump, there isn't one, but what do I know? Finally, for me, just in equities, Microsoft Server software has exploited an has been exploited by unidentified hackers, with analysts warning of widespread cybersecurity breaches across the globe, so bearish. Nvidia's supply chain partner Foxconn plans to begin designing AI servers based on next-gen Vera Rubin chip next month, or this
Oh,
month,
good.
sorry. Good for us. TSMC plans to ramp up
Sounds
its
like the name of your nan, doesn't it? Vera
It
Rubin.
does. Yeah, no, exactly that. TSMC plans to ramp up 2 nanometer capacity to 100,000 wafers per month next year from its 40,000 wafer per month this year, due to strong demand from major clients including Apple, AMD, Intel, Qualcomm, MediaTek, Nvidia and others. The Chinese EV brands Neta and Zeekr being accused of inflating their car sales in recent years to hit aggressive targets, with Neta doing so for more than 60,000 cars. That's according to documents reviewed by Reuters and interviews with dealers and buyers. Just
Just a
make up the
rounding
numbers,
error.
mate. Yeah, no, make the numbers up, mate. Just learn from the best. Learn from your own government. That's what they do. Sticking with car names, Stellantis expects a net loss of 2.3 billion euros for the first half of 2025, it said on Monday, as it forecasts an initial hit of 0. What? How that can't be right. Okay, yeah, no, it is. It forecast an initial hit of 0.3 billion euros from US tariffs for the first half of the year. So, you take out the 0.3 billion for US tariffs, you're still 2 billion underwater. So that's a bit of a shocker there. BP, the oil giant, they've appointed Albert Manifold, nice car related name there, as its new chairman, replacing Helge Lund amid pressure for a change in the company's direction from activist shareholder Elliott Investment Management. Ryanair's first quarter net profit more than doubled, driven by Easter holiday being in April and an increase in fares. So more of an accounting benefit there. Ryanair also said that any tariff costs would be on Boeing to bear. Finally, for me, Roche Holdings experimental drug for deadly lung condition got mixed results in trials. A setback as the company seeks to accelerate development of new treatments. And that's it from me. Back to you in the studio.
Good stuff. Thank you, Ryan. In terms of today and the week ahead, then, we have a very light docket, to be completely honest with you, certainly over the next 3 or 4 days, but we will just take it day by day anyway, just to run through what's going on. Today, this won't take me very long. There are absolutely no notable economic releases due on the data docket. There are also no central bank speakers scheduled either. And of course, recall that the FOMC are, and you can pop the champagne for this one, now in their pre-meeting blackout period ahead of the next policy decision, which comes next Wednesday on the 30th of July. Moving into tomorrow, we get the latest UK borrowing stats. They are going to be pretty grim for Rachel Reeves, you would imagine. We also get manufacturing figures from the Richmond Fed over in the United States, and remarks are due from the BOE Governor Andrew Bailey, although I believe he will be speaking on the issue of financial stability. Also, earnings season, of course, continuing this week. Tuesday's earnings highlights come from the likes of Lockheed Martin, Coca-Cola and SAP, of course, SAP being the biggest stock in the DAX. Moving into Wednesday, we get consumer confidence from the Eurozone. We have a 20-year auction from the United States. And in terms of earnings, it's quite a big one after the close on Wednesday, where we're due to hear from both Alphabet and from Tesla. Into Thursday, probably the busiest day of the week, we have flash PMI figures due from pretty much everywhere, which are likely to show a very marginal improvement in conditions in both the manufacturing and the services sectors compared to where we were back in the month of June. We also have a policy decision due from the ECB on Thursday. The ECB almost certain to maintain the deposit rate at 2%. Very unlikely that they make any changes to their guidance as well. When have you ever known a European to want to rock the boat or cause any surprises before they disappear on an 8-week-long summer holiday? Also on Thursday, we get the weekly jobless claims stats out of the United States, where the continuing claims print coincides with the July non-farm payroll survey week. And earnings on Thursday come from the likes of American Airlines, Southwest Airlines and Intel. And then into Friday, we have, Ryan, your favourite economic data release, which is, of course, the Tokyo CPI figures out of Japan.
Don't do the eyes.
No, please don't. That's what I was trying to avoid saying earlier.
Yeah, I know you are.
Also on Friday, we have the latest retail sales figures due from the UK, IFO sentiment figures out of Germany, and durable goods orders from the United States. I'm just going to say this on durables now. I'll probably say it again on Friday. Durable goods orders rose by 16.4% in May because Qatar Airways ordered about 200 odd Boeing aeroplanes. Durable goods orders are set to fall by about 10% in June, because Qatar Airways didn't order another 200 Boeing aeroplanes. When that durables print comes out, there's going to be the usual people going,
yeah, it's going to be horrific.
The economy's going to shit, everything's falling off a cliff. It's just a quirk in the data, basically. When you take out... you take out transport orders, when you take out defence orders, we've basically been flat for 3 months. We'll probably be flat again this month as well. So just ignore that data entirely. And then, of course, the other just standing reminder is, as we move towards that 1st of August deadline on trade, the potential for any tariff-related news throughout the week will also be closely watched by market participants. And I think that is probably it from me this morning.
Wonderful. Well, Michael, it's good to have you back after a long weekend. Well, not a long weekend, but it felt like a long weekend for me. Have a great day, listeners. Thank you as always for tuning in. Whatever you're doing, keep it tight, stay safe, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Much love.
Indeed. Bye for now.